While Art continues his training with the 8th edition of Toby, Tessia's words still linger in his mind. He takes his frustration out on Toby. Even with the enhanced barrier, Toby is barely able to keep up with Art. Eventually, its mana reserves start to run low, causing it to initiate a shutdown. This gives Art the perfect opportunity to finish the combat, yet he decides to stop just before making contact and spares this version. He is left completely exhausted. Even Sylvie begins to get worried that he might be pushing himself too hard. But he assures Sylvie that he is fine. Art gets visited by Professor Glory. She wanted to check up on him since both he and Tessia have been skipping out on her classes lately. She also wanted to make sure that the two teenagers weren't up to something mischievous. She is shocked to see the state of the training room. Art tells her it's because of his training, but that only raises more questions in her mind. Not only does he have such a large training room all to himself, but for it to be in such a state, she's curious about what kind of training he does there. The more she finds out about him, the more mysterious he seems to get. Art has once again become the talking point for everyone. This time it's because of his recent injuries. The professor greets him as he returns to the class. Seeing Art lost in thought, he attempts to recapture his focus by posing a question. He asks Art about spell formations. Spell formation is about combining or altering a spell to make it produce a different effect than it normally would. Professor Maynor is impressed with Art's answer and decides to continue the discussion. He tells the class to imagine a world where everyone could read each other's minds. In this hypothetical world, everyone's thoughts would be laid bare for others to read. This would make even the kindest person seem cruel, as everyone would be able to tell what's actually inside their mind. He believes that such a world would produce the best mages ever known. With a promise to explain this later, he raises a question for the whole class. Why do some mages chant spells while others don't? Normally, lower-level mages chant their spells, while higher-level mages who have mastered a spell can forego this practice. A better way of putting this would be that mages employ chants in spellcasting because words hold the power to shape one's thoughts. They fill the caster's mind with the correct visualization so the mana can be molded to achieve the desired effects. Professor tries to explain this with a humorous example. If he were to say, "I love you" to a girl, then one can be sure there will be some sort of reaction from her. This would take the form of either her cringing in disgust or slapping him. The first part can be thought of as the incantation, while the reaction is the spell. Art's mind immediately goes to the argument he had with Tessia, so it seems that Professor Maynor was right on the mark when he talked about visualization. One's thoughts can influence the spell. If one has a higher level of focus and visualization, one can omit the chant altogether. Coming back to his previous example, he explains that in a world where everyone can read each other's minds, people would have absolute control over their thoughts. Hence, they would be able to produce more powerful spells. Art couldn't help being distracted throughout the class. He just can't stop thinking about his fight with Tessia. Even he is surprised by how much he is bothered by her words. There are plenty of people who hated him when he was an adventurer, but it never slowed him down. But this time it's different. While he is thinking about this, 3 students have started following him. Although he may be distracted, it's hard to miss something so obvious. It doesn't take long for him to realize that he is being followed by Lucas, along with 2 other students. The 2 students are Charles Ravenpour and a boy named Marcois. They have all come seeking revenge for everything Art has done to them in the past. For Lucas, it's about their duel during Professor Glory's class. He wants to know how Art managed to escape his Inferno Cage spell and arrived on the other side of the field. It is inhuman for someone to accomplish this so quickly. However, Art refuses to answer him. Lucas starts accusing Art of using an artifact. He tells Art that he probably got it from Tessia. Art starts to get pissed off, but he controls his anger as he is already aware of Lucas's antics. They are interrupted by Marcois. For some reason, he seems angrier and more out of control. He suggests that he must have received it from Princess Kathleen after he seduced her. Little by little, his anger grows stronger. Eventually, he becomes so furious that he starts leaking mana. Charles tries to stop him, but he has been completely consumed by his rage. Art also tries to calm him down, but it falls on deaf ears. It is revealed that Marcois is a stalker, and he is completely infatuated with Princess Kathleen. Even Lucas realizes that the boy has gone crazy. Being true to his nature, he isn't bothered. In fact, he is happy that Art is in trouble. Both Sylvie and Art notice something strange. The amount of mana that Marcois is leaking isn't normal. Any ordinary person would pass out. Consumed by rage, he starts behaving like a rabid beast. He uses his earth magic and charges towards Art, intending to kill him. Because of his unusual strength, all Art can do is deflect the attack. He is left stunned after witnessing the power behind the assault. Even Charles becomes concerned. Yet Lucas is the exact opposite. He makes his intention clear when he starts pretending to be a helpless bystander. He says all this with a cheeky grin on his face. Unlike Charles, he isn't worried even though Marcois might be in serious danger. On the contrary, he brings up the topic of how Charles was worried about losing to Marcois in their upcoming duel in a class. If things continue the way they are now, Marcois will either get himself seriously hurt or he will injure Art and get expelled. Unlike Charles, who seems to have some humanity left, while Lucas doesn't. The two of them make their exit, leaving Art to deal with the boy on his own. The situation seems to be getting worse and worse as Marcois continues to morph into something akin to a monster. Art is barely holding on. Luck finally strikes for Art when Sylvie decides to unveil her true form. In her dragon state, she is easily able to beat Marcois with a single stomp and knocks him unconscious. Just as the fight ends, Claire also arrives. She came after detecting a large amount of mana. After Art explains the situation, she decides to examine Marcois. Both of them are left shocked when they discover strange symbols on his spine. However, Claire is already familiar with them as this is not the first time that she has encountered this on campus. While Marcois recovers in the hospital, she explains the situation to Art. While Art was recovering from his injuries, there was another case similar to this. He is filled with questions, but she tells him that she will discuss this in their next meeting. Before doing anything else, they decide to report this to Cynthia to bring her up to speed. When Art enters the director's office, he is surprised to see the unexpected guests. It's two of the Lances, including Baron. Claire has a different reaction compared to Art. She's completely starstruck upon seeing Lance Baron and Lance Aaliyah in the flesh. She respectfully introduces herself to the two Lances and expresses her dream of becoming one herself someday. Regardless, Baron ignores her and continues his conversation with Cynthia. After they are done talking, they begin to leave. As they walk past him, Art notices their mana level. Both Sylvie and Art can tell how unbelievably strong both of them are. Now that's out of the way, they focus on the purpose of their visit to the director's office. But before they can start, Art has a query for Cynthia. He inquires about the reason why the two Lances are here. Surely such important people wouldn't just come down for a simple chat. Cynthia tells Art that he doesn't need to be concerned. She does, however, tell him that she wishes that they came bearing better news, indicating that it was something bad. Art tells her about the events from the other night. Starting with Lucas, Charles, and Marcois following him, he places special emphasis on Marcois' odd behavior and his mana fluctuation. Cynthia is intrigued. Even though she doesn't say anything, Art can tell from her body language that she knows more than she's letting on. She tells him that neither the medics nor the artificers know what exactly this is. The school has reached out to the Mage Guild to send some researchers, so hopefully they'll find out soon. Art still can't help but feel that there's something weird about all this. Cynthia instructs Claire to continue the patrols. She even offers to provide more staff during nighttime. Art and Claire leave for their classes after the meeting. Art was right about his suspicion that Cynthia knows more. Adir asks her if it is wise to involve the students. She replies by telling him that some sacrifices might be necessary since they'd come so far. Her stress is visible on her face as she wonders why they are moving already. Art parts ways with Claire to go back to his dorm. On his way back, he sees Baron and Lucas having a conversation down the corridor. He quickly hides behind a wall, but he is much too far to hear what they are saying. He can see that even the arrogant Lucas has to hold his head down in front of his brother. With his brother backing him, Art knows that he can't do anything to Lucas. At least not yet. Suddenly, Art is under attack. He finds himself at the sharp end of the sword. It's Lance Aaliyah. She came after sensing Art's intense bloodlust for Lucas. Although Art did manage to pull out his sword, he was too late. If she was an enemy, he would have been dead. He clears up the misunderstanding by telling her that he doesn't harbor any anger toward Lance Baron. Despite Art's attempt to hide his presence, she consents to him. Nevertheless, even she couldn't tell that Art is a quadra-elemental mage, and instead mistakes him for a dual elemental. This only goes to show how great Gideon's artifact is. Aaliyah also warns Art about fighting Lance Baron. She describes him as frighteningly strong. Art also asks her about her strength. She tries to joke about it by gesturing with her hand, but her joke falls flat. The disappointment is clear on her face as she tells him that she's the weakest among the Lances. She adds that there is a huge margin between them. Baron is definitely one of the strongest, but she asserts that even he can't match her level of perception. It starts to make sense how she was able to notice Art's presence. As Baron finishes talking with Lucas, she says goodbye to Art. He reminds her of her little brother. From the way she talks about him, it suggests that he's probably gone. After thanking Art for the conversation, both the Lances leave. The next day, Art heads to his meeting with the rest of the DC officers. As expected, the rumors about Marcois have started spreading like wildfire. Upon arriving, he is surprised to see a gloomy expression on all of the DC officers. He wonders what is going on. It's made evident when Claire gives him the news that Marcois died last night. Art is left shocked. He asks Claire about how Marcois died. Curtis tells him that the medics couldn't stop his mana leakage. This is quite unusual, as the leakage should have stopped after he lost consciousness. It obviously had something to do with the symbols on his back. The medics weren't able to find out much about them. However, whatever small details they discovered, they're not disclosing. Even the parents refuse to tell them anything. Theo gets really annoyed and slams the table. He is angry at the fact that they're not being told anything, even though they're the ones trying to stop this from happening. Regardless, the only thing they can do is strengthen their patrol schedule and hope to stop more students from getting affected. Art is scheduled to patrol with Theo. Ferrith wonders if he'll be alright since the two of them didn't get off to a great start, but Art isn't worried. In fact, the schedule works out great for him since he'll be able to take his classes as well as do the patrol. The only thing that surprises him is the duration of the patrol. Meanwhile, Ferrith is more surprised by the communication devices. They are disguised as daggers, so he didn't know that they were supposed to be used for communication. Even Art didn't know that. He thought they were just a symbolic gesture. Among all this, the most surprising thing is how Kai volunteered to be on patrol by himself. In fact, his patrol schedule puts him at a large portion of the campus. He is not the diligent type. On the contrary, he is notorious for avoiding work. Yet Art brushes that thought aside and tells them that he's probably just tired of patrolling with Theo. He says goodbye to both of them as he heads off to teach his class. He starts the lecture off by asking his students if they had the chance to think about the question that he posed yesterday. Is the color of a mage's mana core a truly accurate way of measuring their level? No one knows the answer. Only Ferrith raises his hand to answer the question. He answers by telling Art that it is an excellent way of accurately measuring the power. He believes that it not only correlates with the effort and time that a mage invests, but also strongly indicates their potential. Before he can continue, Art interrupts him by telling him that he is wrong. Using the color of one's mana core discounts other factors that make up a mage. Things like reaction speed, battle sense, knowledge of spells, etc. These are not taken into account when measuring one's mana core. Art believes that it's similar to judging a warrior's compatibility by the size of their muscles. One can say that the warrior with the bigger muscles is strong. Nevertheless, it doesn't tell how good of a fighter they are. But this raises the question that if one cannot tell the strength of a mage from their mana core, then what exactly is the best way to gauge your opponent's strength? The answer is quite simple. There is no way to know. The students are left confused. Art tells them that the best thing to do is to always assume that your opponent is stronger than you. Hypothetically speaking, even if one could accurately tell a mage's strength from the color of their mana core, they would still fight whether their opponent was stronger or weaker. He asserts that assuming that you are weaker than your opponent will always keep you on your guard. This way they won't get careless. With the explanation done, he moves on to the practical exercise. After yesterday's embarrassment, all the students are ready to prove themselves. He ends up falling asleep while the rest of the students practice. He rushes to his next class and manages to get there just in time. He apologizes to Professor Glory and tells her that he will get dressed right away for their exercise. However, she tells him that he is not going to be participating in any physical activities until he has fully recovered. She instead tells him to go sit in the stands. When he gets there, he sees Tessia already sitting there. She probably got the same treatment from the professor. The awkwardness ensues as they both sit together. Before he can even start speaking, she stops him right in his tracks and apologizes for lashing out. She also said things that she wished she hadn't. Nonetheless, Art admits that the things she said were true. He admits that he knew how she felt about him, but he was too afraid to face it. Emotions are a lot more complicated for him since he can't just simply get better at them with training. He apologizes for their earlier fight, but he tells her that he cannot have a relationship with her. Tessia is filled with disappointment and sadness, but her expression quickly changes as he adds that this is for the time being. She's left confused by what he means. He clarifies by telling her that maybe something can happen when they're older. Tessia decides to get her revenge by teasing him. Art is left in a frenzy as he tries to explain himself. This gets a chuckle out of Tessia and Sylvie. He doesn't want to keep her waiting for him, so he decides to do something to buy himself a little time. He gets up and gently kisses her on the forehead, leaving her completely speechless. He has a similar reaction to what Tessia had after she did the same. It is not helped by the fact that Sylvie keeps reminding him whenever she has the chance. He cannot even focus on his class. This is another advanced class that Art decided to take to learn deviant magic theory, but it turned out to be a dissatisfaction. Even after a week of studying, they're only covering the basics that he already knows. The only thing on his mind is how Tessia is feeling after their talk. Similar to Art, the only thing on her mind is the fact that Art kissed her. She is left completely embarrassed while thinking about it. Even though it was just a forehead, it was still a very big deal for her. She starts getting completely ahead of herself and starts thinking about how their kids would look like. It's nighttime and the DC officers have begun their patrol. As always, the hooligans are out causing nothing but trouble. Art catches a pair of them while they're doing graffiti. The boy manages to escape, but the girl gets cornered. With no other choice, she decides to use her magic to try and get away and tries to attack him with water magic, but he is able to easily dodge it and trip her. He releases his wind magic, which leaves the girl terrified. He gives her two options. Either she can come willingly, or he'll have to force her. After a few minutes pass, Theo returns with the boy. It seems he didn't manage to escape after all, but neither of them has any symbols on their back, so it seems that they're not involved. Theo volunteers to take both of them to the admin's office while Art continues his patrol. The rest of the night turns out to be a long, boring walk. It's just about time for him to finish. While patrolling, Art accidentally stumbles near Kai's patrol route. Suddenly, he spots something and quickly hides behind a pillar. It's a guy running with a black hood covering his face. His shirt shifts a bit and Art is able to see the same symbol on his back as Marco's. He decides to quietly follow behind him. This way he can find out the location of their hideout. Suddenly, someone comes up behind him while loudly calling his name. This alerts the guy in the black hoodie, and he quickly disappears. The person calling his name was none other than Kai. Art gets angry at him for letting the guy get away. He could have found out where they were hiding if only Kai was a little careful. But there is nothing to be done now. He asks Art about Theo's location. Art tells him about how they caught a couple of students doing graffiti and Theo is escorting them to the admin's office. However, Kai wonders why it's taking him so long to do this. Their conversation is interrupted when their communication devices suddenly start glowing. They glow yellow, which means Theo has activated his dagger. Since it's his area, Kai volunteers to find the person that Art was tailing. This way he can go and help his partner. Before leaving, he describes the person to Kai. However, it's evident that there's something fishy going on. Upon arriving at Theo's location, Art sees that the other two DC officers are already there. Dordry tells him that someone attacked Theo and knocked him out. Hence, the two students that he was escorting also got away. Yet, knowing Theo's strength, it's obvious that a normal strike couldn't have knocked him out. He insists that it had to be a powerful augmenter. Curtis tells him that it was an ambush. By the time he and Dordry got there, the two students were already gone. Art wonders if one of the students' friends helped them. Theo insists that it wasn't them. A normal student wouldn't have been able to knock him out. It had to be someone older or someone like Marco's. He reveals that he managed to graze one of them before he blacked out, but he couldn't get a visual. This makes Art think back to his conversation with Kai. He noticed an injury on Kai's arm, an injury he did not have before. Theo asks him what he was doing in Kai's area. Art decides that telling them about the hooded guy wouldn't do any good right now, so he decides to tell them nothing. Knowing Art, they instantly know that he was up to something. They arrive at the wrong conclusion that he doesn't trust Kai, so he was covering his area just to make sure. Theo assures Art that Kai is trustworthy and he can carry his own weight. Even Dordry seems to think so. They are unaware of the actual situation unfolding. The next morning, Art continues with his regular lectures. He once again finds himself distracted. Yesterday it was about Tessia. Today it's about what happened last night. What's bothering him is that Kai called out his name so loudly. Maybe he was trying to warn someone. On the other hand, maybe he is just overthinking it. All this time, Gideon has been standing behind him, wondering what he's doing. He looks at the mess that Art has created. He wonders if he has once again created something groundbreaking. Much to his disappointment, the mess is just a mess. 2 other classes go by in the blink of an eye. He just can't get himself to focus. Professor Glory's class is in full swing as well. Once again, all Art can do is sit on the sidelines and watch. Yet this allows him to reflect on the encounter with Marcoes. He cannot believe that after everything that happened, all Lucas got was a few days of suspension. Professor Glory comes and sits beside Art, with a disappointed look on her face. She tells him that the council has banned all excursions to a dungeon that she likes to take her class to. Due to an unknown incident, the Lances are investigating it. Art wonders if this means that their semester trip has been canceled. She tells him that there still might be a trip, but it would probably be to a lower-level dungeon compared to the ones that she usually takes her students to. After the class has ended, Art goes to his training room to have the usual assimilation session with Tessia. After their session, they decide to take a break and cool off in the pond. Art asks her about any rejection symptoms that she might be having from her beast will. Luckily for her, there has been none, ever since the incident at Professor Glory's class. At this rate, Tessia's assimilation should be complete in a few weeks. Her mana core may even become a few levels higher. His chain of thought is interrupted as she playfully splashes water on him. This eventually turns into a full-on water fight between the two of them. Their fun time is interrupted by Cynthia. She arrives at the training room with bruises and cuts all over her body. Both of them are shocked by this. Tessia is especially worried about her master's health. However, Cynthia assures them that she is fine. She wanted to stretch out her old bones, so she decided to have a sparring session at the Mages Guild. Art still wonders what she was doing there since she was supposed to have a meeting with the council. Cynthia tells him that she just took a quick detour to relieve some stress. It's time for her private lecture with Tessia. She requests Art's permission to use his private training room for their lesson. He tells them that it's no problem and leaves so he doesn't interrupt them. Although he didn't say anything before, it's obvious that Cynthia is hiding something. Nevertheless, Art knows that it's not his place to pry. He continues with his normal lectures. He has been sleepy these past few days. This is all because of the late-night patrols that he has to do. It's not just him, though. Elijah has been coming back late as well. This is because of his club activities. He has joined the Chain Casting Research Club. This is another attempt by him at finding a girlfriend. In the heat of the moment, Elijah forgets that he is in the middle of a class and makes a complete fool of himself. The teacher decides to address the incident with Marcoes. He explains that it was a most tragic event, and in light of it, he wants to teach the class about the dangers of wielding this power that many take for granted. Although the medics are still trying to find out what really happened, they do know that Marcoes had used magic that was far too strong for his body to handle. Much like any other muscle in the body, overexerting one's mana core can have devastating, sometimes permanent effects. In extreme cases, it could even be fatal. One student raises a question that has been on everyone's mind. Why didn't Marcoes survive after he was given a mana recovery elixir? The professor explains that there are always exceptions. External aid to forcefully boost mana reserves always has side effects, one of which is excessive mana leakage. Yet this still doesn't explain his raided behavior and the symbols on his back. Once again, it's time for Art's lecture. It has been several days since he demonstrated the skill, but none of the students have been able to duplicate it. Hence, he decides to give them a hint. He calls Lester to the field. While explaining, he rips a piece of paper into two. He turns the first piece of paper into a paper ball. This ball represents a normal spell that everyone is used to seeing. Art blows on it, and it slowly falls to the ground without reaching Lester. With the other piece of paper, he tries to demonstrate the stronger spell that he used. He rolls a piece of paper into a paper pipe and uses it to launch the paper ball much further. He describes this as a big hint for all the augmenters. Regardless, unlike him, they are not magical geniuses, so it completely flies over their heads. Elsewhere, Baron and Aaliyah are waiting in the meeting room. They have both been summoned by Lance Veray. The only thing Baron knows is that it has something to do with what he found in the dungeon. Lance Veray finally arrives, and their meeting begins. The reason that they have been called here is because they have discovered strange signs in the deepest levels of some dungeons. These signs tell of mages that are not from Decathan. Aaliyah is left completely shocked. It hasn't been long since they discovered the existence of another continent, and now they have even discovered the existence of foreign mages among them. The troubling thing is that they don't know how long these mages have been here. The piece of cloth that Baron found had beast fibers that either haven't been discovered or they are indigenous to Decathan. Baron also discovered mana imbued into the fibers, and he questions whether the council has received any information on that. However, whatever spell form was wounded into the cloth dissipated as soon as it was torn. Nevertheless, Aaliyah has been brought here for another reason. There is a new mission for her. There have been unusual sightings of titanic bloodworms. They are common mana beasts, so she wonders what's so unusual about their sightings. At first, it all seemed normal. Yet, upon more investigation, it was found that they had been deviating heavily from their usual tunneling patterns. It's all probably related to rabid mana beast sightings. Aaliyah is being sent to investigate these mana beasts. With her sensory magic, she would be able to cover a large range. Viray tells her that she can wait for Lance Mika to finish her mission in Darv, and they can go together. However, that would be too late, so she volunteers to go alone. Back at the Exiris Academy, Art continues his school life. He walks in on Curtis and Kathleen's training session. They're supposed to be fighting together against Theo, but from the looks of things, one can easily mistake it as them fighting against each other. Theo attacks them from above using his gravity magic. Against this intense pressure, Curtis is barely able to stand. He drops his weapon, leaving him defenseless. However, he is not about to give up and uses a powerful spell that knocks Theo back. He is really impressed by Curtis's performance and gets excited for their next round. But their fun is interrupted by Kai. He stops their fight using thin metal threads. This is his deviant magic. Art is surprised by this. It's metal attribute magic with no sound. He couldn't even sense it. On top of that, he wonders how he's controlling the strings. Claire hurries everyone up to start their meeting as they have classes afterward. Professor Glory is going to take her class on a trip to the Beast Glades. This means that Art, Curtis, and Claire will be off campus for a while. They will have to reorganize their patrol routes, and someone will have to volunteer for more patrol hours. Kai is the first one to volunteer as he has no friends. Ferrith is not one to be left behind, so he too volunteers, proudly claiming that he also has no friends. Kai tricks Dordrea into volunteering as well. Now that they have their volunteers, they are all set for the coming weeks. This concludes their meeting, so Art heads out for his classes. On his way, he is stopped by Ferrith. It seems he wanted to boast to Art about his time on the Beast Glades. He even offers to give him advice. Little does he know that Art is an A-class adventurer. While Ferrith is busy talking to Kathleen, he decides to quickly make his way out before he gets caught up in more awkward conversations. While leaving, he sees Kai talking to Dordrea. The same question pops up in his mind, so he asks Claire about what sort of magic Kai uses. However, even Claire doesn't know about it since he is very secretive. Kai overhears their conversation and comes over to talk. Art asks him directly. Nevertheless, Kai tells him that if he reveals this information, he will have to kill Art. He probably implied it as a joke, but his mannerisms make it sound like a threat. Sensing that a conversation is brewing into a fight, Claire quickly steps up to put out the ember before it turns into a fire. Back at Art's private training room, Elijah has also started training with Toby. Nonetheless, he is not as strong as Art. Elijah makes up the excuse that it's not as cool as using magic. That's why he's not as good of an augmenter. Hence, Art decides to train him. Even though he is a conjurer, he should learn the basics of melee combat. This will help him in real fights as well as impress girls. Elijah instantly finds his energy upon hearing the last bit. He charges straight at Art, but he is obviously not as good as him. Still, Art is very impressed. His swings have little wasted movement, and he has stable footwork. But with some training, Elijah could become a strong swordsman. Paired with his unique earth magic, he can become very strong. This doesn't stop him from making a fool of himself while fighting. As their fight ends, Elijah has a strange vision similar to the one he had when he was a kid. He gets a glimpse of Art's past as the king. This is followed by immense pain in his head. Art instantly comes over to help him, but he refuses the help. He says that he just has a bad headache and he's going to be fine. With that, he leaves, wondering what all of that was about. It's spring season in Exiris City. The next few weeks passed by in a sturdy rhythm. Nothing much happened, and Art used this time to relax and study. Even with his midterms approaching, it was hard for him to stay enthusiastic about all his classes. Some of them passed by in the blink of an eye, while others he enjoyed. He continued growing his skills while training with Toby. Despite all this, he never forgot the real reason he decided to attend school. The small moments with the people he cherished became the thing he looked forward to every day. Ever since Elijah had that vision, he has been daydreaming a lot. It always seems like he's lost in thought. He continues to hide it from Art and tells him that he's just worried about exams. He wishes good luck Art for his excursion to the Beast Glades tomorrow and leaves. Despite Elijah's attempt to hide his feelings, Art has noticed that he seems angry at him for some reason. For now, he cannot do anything about it. He continues his assimilation sessions with Tessia. After many weeks of assimilation, her mana core has become a lot more stable. She is excited about the upcoming excursion to the Beast Glades. Regardless, Art reminds her that she's only at half her usual strength, so she needs to be careful. She tells him that he doesn't need to baby her all the time. She reminds him that she's still a year older than him. Art responds to that by teasing her about her fear of monsters when they were kids. She gets angry and jumps at him. However, just then, Varian arrives and misunderstands the situation. He believes that he might have walked in on the two of them. Tessia is left completely embarrassed. Art is surprised to see him as he was supposed to be having a meeting with the council. Varian reveals that he escaped to take a breather and check up on his granddaughter. He was worried about their dungeon excursion tomorrow. He wanted to ask Cynthia to keep an eye on her in case her core flares up. But she's busy. So he asks Art instead. Normally it wouldn't be a problem, but he's already promised his family to spend the night with them. Varian comes up with the idea that he can take Tessia with him. This way he can also introduce her properly to his parents. Regardless, he straight up refuses this. This is because he knows how his parents will act when they see Tessia. Despite all his attempts to refuse, he finds himself standing outside his house with Tessia. The whole family comes out to welcome the two of them. They had even prepared gifts for Tessia. They already had a suspicion that Art would be bringing her along. They all spend the rest of the night bonding as a family. Watching this brings a smile to Art's face. Elsewhere, Aaliyah has finally arrived at the dungeon. As she goes deeper and deeper, she comes across a split in the trail. It seems that their information was right about the titanic blood worms. After seeing the trail, she has realized that there is no way that they are moving on their own accord. Based on the patterns, they seem to be all gathering at one spot and heading east toward the Grand Mountains. She continues following the trail and goes deeper into the dungeon. Eventually, she comes across a cliff. At the bottom of the cliff, there is a Hades serpent waiting for a chance to strike. Once again, this monster is different from the normal ones. It has horns and the coloring is also different. For a species that doesn't even care about its offspring, it doesn't make sense for it to be guarding something like a tunnel. Instead of continuing alone, she decides to call for backup. She uses a communication device to call Lance Verray. She reports the sighting of the strange Hades serpent to her. Lance Verray informs her that she has 50 battle mages ready to be teleported to the nearest gate and tells her to wait for further instructions. Back at Helstia's mansion, Art is enjoying the night with his family. It's getting late, and everyone is getting ready to go to sleep. Even Ellie falls asleep on the couch. Ray gives her to Art, telling him that a big brother should take responsibility and put her to bed. He also mentions that she asks about him every day when he's not here. He should say goodbye to her before leaving in the morning. Meanwhile, Tessia is also having a good time with Alice. They enjoy the weather while drinking tea. Tessia asks Alice if she's worried about Art going into the dungeon. The answer to this question is an obvious yes. No matter how strong someone gets, a mother is always worried for her child. Tessia assures her that she doesn't have to worry. She promises to look after Art, even if it means putting herself in danger. To her surprise, Alice suggests that she shouldn't do so. After all, she's a precious daughter to her parents as well, and they would be devastated if anything happens to her. Most of all, she trusts her son to take care of himself. With the winter approaching, it has started to get cold. Alice suggests they should get inside. Regardless, Tessia wants to spend a little more time outside, so Alice leaves to give her some alone time. Back in the house, Art has fulfilled his duty of putting his sister to bed. Yet she wakes up and asks Art when he's leaving. She's a bit saddened to know that he will be leaving in the morning. He promises to come back to meet her after he comes back from his dungeon field trip. Ellie still wants to spend more time with Art, so she asks him to tell her a story. Despite his initial hesitation, he decides to do it. Art sits next to Ellie and asks her what story she would like to hear. She wants to know about the story of how he became a professor. He continues the story while making himself to be the hero, saving the helpless princess. Ellie makes sure to use her opportunity to tease Art whenever she gets it. Art finishes the story after telling her how he got access to the restricted part of the library, as well as his own private training room with mana crystals. Nonetheless, Ellie keeps asking questions, and Art has no choice but to answer them. This goes on for a while. Just like that, it's morning. Ray and Alice couldn't find Art in his room, so they go looking for him. They decide to check into Ellie's room. They are pleasantly surprised when they find Art sitting next to her while sleeping. This is similar to when he first rescued Tessia, and they had to spend the night in a tent. Winter has finally arrived, and it's time for the students to head out for their excursion. Professor Glory starts gathering everyone and tells them to get with their teams. Art tells Sylvie that she should use this time to do more hunting. This way she can get even stronger. He tells her that he will be fine on his own since it's a low-level dungeon. On top of that, Professor will be with them the entire time. Satisfied with this, she heads off on her own. Unfortunately for Art, he has been grouped with Lucas. Yet after his last dungeon raid with Lucas, this time he is prepared for anything he might do. Before they leave, they have to decide on a group leader. Lucas tries to claim this title for himself. However, it fails as everyone instantly votes for Tessia. She tries to make the case that it should be Art since he's stronger. But they insist as she has had more experience